Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Does this thing work?
This thing does work.
Okay, good.
So we met about a year and a half ago,
That's
actually
right.
at another Wisdom 2.0 event. You're going to be on also later with Sam Altman. We're going to be talking in a separate conversation. But this one, we really want to dive more deeply into Robert Oppenheimer and his legacy and the lessons potentially that he has for our current age. And I noticed after watching the movie Oppenheimer, I had a much more expanded view of his life and his kind of mission and purpose. And I feel like the situation that he was in, we're potentially in a very similar situation with AI. Except with their situation, they built something, we're building something that's getting smarter and smarter and more intelligent by the day while we sleep in AI. And so there's definitely some differences, but there's also this huge monumental moment that was then, and it feels like very similar to a moment that we're having now. But before we dive too deeply into that, I was wondering, did you feel like the movie portrayed Robert Oppenheimer in a way that's accurate to how you both know of him? And what are some of the misnomers that you feel like are still maybe out there about his life and legacy?
Sure.
And you probably know him or know his world better than anyone, even though I don't think you met him personally. But
That's right. Yeah, actually, I didn't meet my grandfather. I was born in 75 and he died in 67. The simple answer about the movie is I thought it was well done.
Okay.
The longer answer is very, very long, longer than the time we have here. But I think Nolan did do a good job, and I appreciate the public attention that it's put on him. I've made somewhat of a big effort to go out there and try to speak publicly from the family perspective, because it's something that we'd really never done in the family. We pretty much had the exact opposite policy of trying to avoid all publicity, and things like participating in movies and books were very not approved of in the culture that I grew up with. And so that was all part of the experience of the movie. But to your question of whether things are misunderstood about him even after the movie, he's a symbol of bringing technology into the world that could kill people, and people destroy the world. And people still think of him that way. Is it an ambiguous character who's done the right thing or the wrong thing? I spend as much of my time trying to talk about his values that he had, and my view of him as a symbol of the ideas that could really save the world, and that primarily spanned the time post-World War II, when the scientists, including him, saw what was happening of us heading into an arms race, knew that there was a way to prevent an arms race and the destruction of the world, and doing everything he could to stop it, and ultimately not succeeding in policy. But it's stuff that me and Ash and others continue to talk about, because that question of whether we're going to get along with our enemies or try to destroy them with science and technology is kind of the central question that ties into AI today. And
he was building the bomb, and he was also believing in getting along with your adversaries.
So yeah, it's a tough place to be in a war, right?
Yeah.
It's a classic human situation. So classic, it's mythologized in all human cultures. So many people have been in that situation where you have to kill or die, and he was exactly in that situation, as everybody else was. He in a war had no qualms really about participating in a war effort. But the thing that was different was the level and the magnitude of that technology was not, what he would speak about it is that it's not just the same thing as other weapons, that it really is a time where the world changed, fundamentally changed, in that our technology got so strong that the way you can fight wars and battle other people didn't mean the winning of a battle and your side winning, but they foresaw exactly with amazing prescience every point of the arms race and where we would be now, that you can't just get into a battle and beat the other side. You would destroy the world if we go that way. Yeah. And so that's the thing that he saw coming, and thought that there was, logically, we shouldn't do that. Why would we get into arms race if it means that we're going to blow ourselves up? We have to work together with the other side and kind of set up that possibility that was very close after 1945, but it went the other way, and we got into an arms race, and we miraculously survived it. But it wasn't just one technology. It wasn't just fission. It wasn't just nuclear weapons. It's our condition.
Yeah, conditioning, yeah. Ash, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, like Charles said, I think it would take a long time to discuss the misunderstandings that people might have about Robert Oppenheimer. But I thought one thing that maybe did not come sufficiently across in the movie is how deeply his grounding in the humanities and his humanitarian readings and knowledge informed his views on arms control, on science and technology in general. And I always think that that is one of the biggest messages that people need to take away from that movie, because as you and we were discussing, he explicitly said in one of his talks that the problem of atomic energy is not a technical problem. And I think we live in a very similar age where the problem of AI, certainly it's a technical problem, there are exciting technical challenges, but fundamentally it's the problem of how human beings interact with each other when they're on the cusp of creating and harnessing a world-changing technology.
Yeah, and so if we're gonna take lessons for our current age, from that age, and from the lessons of the Manhattan Project and lessons from just that time, what do you think are some of the key ones that we might want to apply to now? And both in terms of we have AI, but we also have enormous division in our world and in our culture and increasing conflicts. And so it feels like technology is increasing at the same time, from my limited perception, conflicts, at least in the last 5 years, seem to also be increasing. What are some lessons do you think that we need to kind of really pay attention to now?
Well, there's a technical one that Ash and I started writing about, which is the Atchison-Lilienthal plan, and it was a very specific kind of what do you do about existential risk policy that was brought together post-World War II, where when you have something very dangerous like fission technology and your side owns it, can you kind of build up an advantage by keeping that technology secret and give yourself an advantage? And will that work? And we know from the philosophy that was, even before they got into the arms race, and then the result of the nuclear arms race, that it didn't work. It didn't make us safer. That was kind of the underlying premise of you can make more bombs, you can make them more powerful, you can do it faster than the other side, but you will never gain safety out of it. So if that's not possible with a technology that strong, and of course we're all in a completely mutually vulnerable situation. We're already at the end of complete insecurity now. We can all die 30 minutes from now from nuclear weapons. It's designed that way, not some 50 years from now with climate change, but it's really already completely vulnerable. If that's the situation of the world, what you should do is accept that and kind of work with another side, including threats of AI and existential threats, and realize that we're kind of in a shared non-zero-sum world. That's what I would hope is the takeaway, and it is at such conflict with common sense and military industrial policy and 100 smart people who would tell me today, you're a dreamer. You can't get along with Republicans or Chinese or Russian. That's impossible. So, that's the lesson, and it's very hard to actually implement in real world.
Yeah. I think one of the big lessons is that you can appeal to people's humanity, but you can also appeal to their self-interest. Even if you disagree with someone, the Chinese Republicans, everyone has self-interest that they want to that they want to safeguard. And a lot of times these interests are common interests. Everyone is interested in the same thing. And that's how we signed all those nuclear weapons treaties with the Soviet Union. We didn't agree with their political system, but we appealed to their self-interest and self-preservation. And that made us realize that we have to work towards what was called common security, because only in common security can you find real peace. And the other thing I think that's a little different, or actually significantly different between nuclear weapons and AI is everyone knew that nuclear weapons can just do bad things. But AI just has the potential to do so much more good than bad. And that's why there's also this uncertainty with AI right now that did not exist with nuclear weapons. You blow up a nuclear weapon, you kill a lot of people. With AI, we don't even know everything that it's capable of, which in my mind makes it even more important for us to be open and share as much as possible. I think openness is the biggest antidote to uncertainty. And there's very fundamental
I think the challenge,
uncertainty.
people would argue that having an open large language models, for example, that other countries that we don't like or don't trust, getting those would be detrimental to humanity and to our safety, because all of a sudden these other countries have the same intelligence that we have. And it seems, at least currently, that the US is kind of further ahead in the AI world than other countries. So could you talk a little bit about how would that world work, where people are sharing more openly, like discoveries that they're making?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to realize, as we have been saying, is that even if we are ahead right now, in 5 years, other countries are going to achieve parity, just like they did with nuclear weapons. And so, that sets up an arms race. By sharing, of course, we don't mean share everything, because there are legitimate economic secrets, national security secrets that we want to safeguard. But what we need to do is we need to work off a common foundation. So let's say an open source AI model that everyone is using to build their own AI models. Now, we don't have to share the precise details of the AI models. But as long as the foundation is a common foundation, if something goes wrong, we can debug those AI models much more easily. In a closed system, especially if an AI in a closed system becomes self-aware, then neither its creators nor everyone else is going to be able to debug it and make attempts to minimize its damages. So I think there, it really comes down to what degree of sharing. And I think there's both technical techniques as well as, treaty-based provisions from the arms race and the Cold War that we can use to decide how much we want to share.
I think one of the things, and maybe Charles, I'd love your thoughts on this, like one of the things I feel like every political person in the United States at least can agree with, Republican or Democrat, they always agree on one thing. The problem is other people.
Yeah. It's the bad guy.
The problem is not more people like me are in power versus like them.
Yeah.
We all agree. Like
Right.
the world would be much better if other people different than me or same as me were in charge. And I think you grew up in a world where, of course, people probably had a lot of strong stories and notions about you, right? Just with your last name. Either they loved you or hated you based on this family name that they thought you've destroyed the world, you've saved the world, all these different things. And I'm wondering, how do we kind of get past some of those narratives that makes us look at ourselves and our own kind of capacities in the world versus this sense that I'm noble and wonderful and smart and all these other people are less noble, wonderful, and smart. And it feels like there's a root of the problem that's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I would love your thoughts on that.
If only we had thought of this 2,000 years ago in all human and wisdom traditions. They all have the central theme. Like that's a known thing in philosophy that's transcended science a long time ago. That is the challenge, right?
Yeah. The otherness, or
the otherness that we have against ourselves,
Yeah.
the lack of knowing yourself, and the lack of knowing other people. And so that in this safe crowd, you can say stuff like that, and actually. I've gotten a new appreciation for classic religions. I'm like, oh, it's all the same thing. If you can just forgive the other side and accept your vulnerability and your lack of ability to control risks and the bad guys. So that's a known thing that arises out of philosophy. It's not really at odds with science. Science, the practice of science is rooted in absolutely fundamentally about openness and sharing. There's no secret part of it, that you're discovering how the world works. But it is quite at odds with human institutions and a lot of human instincts. And that's the race. You have we know what we should do in philosophical terms, and then we have the practical thing. Like I cannot let, even the way you phrased that last question of, we shouldn't let the other side get ahead, that would make us unsafe. Yeah. We're already unsafe, and that philosophy it's pretty deep to understand that. That's what my grandfather brought forward in figuring out what to do with fission, and he lost that argument famously against Truman, where he said, there's no secret here and we're not going to be able to control it. That just doesn't sound good to a military general. Yeah. It sounds like we need 5 years. We need to be a little ahead of China in our AI race. So whether we can reconcile that is difficult on a institution, organizational level. I know what does work on a human level is sitting around and talking to people. And it's not science. It's not anything more fancy than that if you can create a little bit of a human connection.
And I think that also speaks to the importance of having partnerships. across these different stakeholders, because scientists are generally obsessed with finding the truth, and most scientists, if not all, believe that there is a truth out there that you can discover. It's not malleable, it's not subject to political whims. And politicians can have a very different view of the truth, as we have found out well in the last couple of years. So I think forming those bridges between the people who actually know that there's a truth to be discovered and who know of ways to discover that truth, and the other side, is going to be more important than ever.
But isn't so who knows when consciousness first arose? But something happened apparently 13.8 billion years ago, and there was this explosion. We're all remnants of this explosion. We're all the Big Bang in process, right? Like we're all consciousness unfolding, and we came most likely from the same source. It's not like, oh, I'm going to create these people now, and I'm going to create these other people later. Like somehow in this great mystery of life, consciousness emerged, and you could say it happened at the Big Bang. You could say it happened whenever it is. But it happened in a way that we're still in this journey of what we call humans. And it feels like it's very hard for us to meet in that place, right? We meet in these separate roles and identities. And I can only imagine, Charles, you growing up too, where all of a sudden you're an identity. You're like representing a family or representing a country. And maybe the great challenge is like, how do you hold that identity much more lighter than we currently hold it? And would some of the problems and the tensions and the need for the military buildup lessen if we somehow found a way, and you could call me a dreamer too, but somehow found a way to lessen that and be in a world where we see the truth of existence, which to me is that these identities are these stories that we create, but there's a different level of shared connection. Super easy question.
Yeah, you want the answer to that, so I'll just take care of it.
Well, I just gave you one, so yeah, go for it.
One thing that I find helps is to look on the hopeful and optimistic side. Just even recognizing our situation now, most people will say this, things are terrible.
Yeah.
Never been worse,
War,
right?
climate,
we're all
AI,
about to die. Trump, Harris, whatever it is,
Yeah.
everything is bad right now, and it's never been worse. And you can as easily look at our situation and say it's never been better. I think that's as valid of a way to look at it. I didn't grow up as an optimist, so I don't know why when I jump up on stage I'm always saying that. It's real easy.
And your dad was not an optimist.
I remember my friends in high school just being like, "You're so freaking pessimistic" and stuff. So I don't know, but in world situations and the hardest things in the world, you can't disabuse me of the notion that we could get along with our worst enemies, Chinese, Russian, that there is room for commonality in the worst things. And speaking of these things, I was in DC last week and hearing from some people who had gone to China recently, and you know how fractured things are and how difficult it is. They were speaking about one thing they could get along with or get kind of track two dialogues going, which is nobody wanted an automated, unexpected, unwanted nuclear war, auto-escalating thing. Nobody wants that. That's something you can sit down with Chinese and Russian and talk about de-escalation thing with military shared self-interest in a practical, non-woo-woo way. So there's always room for a little bit of common agreement. I found huge hope in nuclear energy. Same thing, I grew up protesting effectively, more on the weapons side. You can look at the exact same science and the same technology and use it for the best things possible. So that's a little chance of transcending our ego.
And I think the capacities are very different than they were 50 years ago in terms of nuclear energy. So I think but there's still the memory of other experiences which are valid.
Yeah, and it also kind of lets you. My experience with nuclear energy is that my conceptions about it were all media delivered. I'm very anti-nuclear weapons, and I always will be, but my knowledge of nuclear energy was purely delivered in news stories about it being dangerous and deadly and killing people. And when you looked at just under the surface of it, you realize it didn't kill anybody. That's the very first, very few people in terms of the relative amount. So you can, and being part of a famous family, you find that happens all the time. There is a lot of fake news. I hate to say it, but like our media conceptions of other people that you think you know all about because you've read a article about them is not the same thing as the actual person. And I've always been tuned into that, but it's part of the otherness that we need to get over.
And Ash, where do you think the science, or you can riff off that, or where do you think that science plays a role in?
So I think the track two dialogues that Charles just mentioned, they're really important. So if you look at the history of the Cold War, even when there was a lot of tension between the political leadership, you had these scientists who had opened these back channels who were talking to each other. One famous example is Reagan's advocacy of the Strategic Defense Initiatives, Star Wars, as it was known. That was a fundamentally flawed technology. But the people who pointed that out to Reagan on one side and Gorbachev on the other were their scientists. And they were having these back-channel conversations with each other, which informed their perception of how bad the technology was, effectively. But I think, speaking more generally, I always find reassurance in the history of science. I think the scientific revolutions that we have experienced, the Copernican revolution, the Darwinian revolution, all of them were exercises in humility. Right?
Yeah.
All of them told us that we are not the center of the universe. And I think that's a harsh, if critical way in which science informs us of the lack of our uniqueness, whether it's on the level of, whether it's on a cosmic level, whether it's on a global level or a national level. I think in that sense, we are like children who stubbornly refuse to accept the truth until science reveals it. And that's the cause for optimism that I personally have, that even though we will go through some bad times, just like it did in the past, at some point, science will reveal truths, we'll fight against them, but we'll eventually have to accept them.
It seems that, I would love that future. It seems that there's a little bit of a battle right now that the truth is whatever I say the truth is. And if I say it enough times and loud enough, all of a sudden that becomes the norm. And I think that people live in a lot of fear right now in the world, in the U.S. in particular. I think people are worried about what's going to happen with artificial intelligence taking their jobs, and they don't feel a safe security net. And so it's easy then to take whatever news you hear and assume this is reality. And now that people get their news from social media and TikTok, I think that there is a real challenge that we have, which is what is actually accurate and what is not. And if you have a world I was interviewing Yuval Harari on this a while ago, and he's like, if the world stops having a shared truth, everything's going to fall apart. Yeah. And this is kind of what dictators do. They say, no, all of this isn't true, but what I say is true. And so I do feel like science potentially is being challenged in a way that maybe hasn't happened for a while.
And I completely agree with you. It's just that secrecy will make that situation worse. Yeah. So even if it's a bad situation, openness is probably the only way to go so that we can improve that situation.
Great. We just have about a minute left. Final thoughts, Charles?
Didn't we just cover everything?
We covered everything.
I think we solved the problems.
You want to tell us what you're focused on these days, or what you're passionate about?
Yeah, focused on this. So speaking publicly, Ash was kind enough to join me because he was writing about science and the history of science, and I asked him to be a science in residence at the Oppenheimer Project. So we spend a certain amount of time talking about that existential risk, these really hard, impossible topics, and then tactically, can we do things that bring hope in a reasonable time frame? And for me, it's been a lot of focus on nuclear energy, the positive side of it, and can that be a bridge to getting rid of our weapons through increased dialogue? So, yeah.
And how are you received in most places? Are you received as like, wow, cool, Robert's grandson? Are you received as like...
Thanks, Chris Nolan.
Oh, shit, oh, shit.
Yeah, no, it's this funny thing where that movie, speaking of media, which you're totally right, people will believe anything out of media. We've seen it cause Holocaust and the worst genocide. So it really is a dangerous thing when it's
people
misused.
Are eating dogs in certain cities and all kinds of things people believe.
But they also believe I'm famous now. So I'm like, all right, you want to sign my thing? And I'm trying to use it for the best possible purpose.
Well, it's interesting, and we're out of time. It's interesting to know, we might talk about this later, it's like, we know that it's all a story, right? Like whatever name or perceptions people have about us, it's a story. Some might be more accurate, some might be less accurate stories, but they're stories, and can we harness the power of that story in a way that's helpful? That's right. And I think that's kind of part of our challenge. And there's a story for humanity, potentially, that we can develop that people get behind. Yeah. All right.
hope so.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you both.
Well, thank you.